rot right behind the facade, and that's what I think is happening.
Let us know what you make of all this.
I got to be honest. This is hard. This is hard to fully interpret. Not only is there a delay, I think it was originally planned for late November. And then they said, well, we'll try to get it in before Christmas. And then it was, well, in January sometime. And then now we want it in February. Then, okay, after the Chinese New Year. Okay, this is very difficult to fully interpret because we don't know yet who all the players are. We don't know yet where all the connections are. We don't know yet how much it's going to be actually used in oil shipments. We don't know how much will be speculator versus actual shipments and deliveries. We don't know how much will be internal infiltration by the basic Rothschild scumfucks who will try to, get in the room and try to control things or muddy the water or just take it over. I mean, take it over. There is that possibility. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think the Rothschilds are strong enough, nor are the Chinese vulnerable enough, or what's the word? No, I hate the word dumb. Naive and unprofessional and incompetent enough to allow the West to take it over. This is going to require a month or more to interpret how's it going. Anyone who thinks, well, we've had 2 days, let's see how it's going. Well, no, you've had 2 days to gather information, and you're going to need a lot more than that just to see who's involved, where it's involved, and how it's being used. I don't have the answers to that yet. I have some hope. I have a lot of hope. I'm curious to see if China is going to force the Saudis to use this contract in order to do two things. In order to guarantee the Chinese investment in Aramco, but also in order to sustain their big Chinese client. I'm talking about the Saudi oil sales in RMB terms. This could be the formality, could be the channel for making it happen. And as that is made happen, you see a serious cut to the petrodollar. I like to call it, death by 1,000 Chinese cuts by a sword. Mm-hmm. This is not going to happen quickly. What it's going to do is ruin the dollar monopoly in oil sales, which means it's going to shatter the petrodollar de facto universal standard. It's no longer going to be universal, and I think it's going to feed right into my forecasted setting of a dual universe where the US dollar commands, who knows, 70%, 75% of global trade, and the RMB of China, it's renminbi, Chinese yuan. The other 30, 35% would be of global trade would be from the Chinese RMB. So the dollar sphere versus the RMB sphere. And I think it's going to, the U.S. is going to be signaling soon. We will not go to war over this. They were willing in Ukraine. They were willing in Syria. And I think there's been a very serious toll taken by the U.S. military, where they've also been shown not to have any kind of military superiority in numerous demos. So when the Chinese step forward, the Americans will be thinking, we cannot take Russia and China on at the same time while battling Iran in Syria.
Right.
You can't say that we're battling directly Iran and Syria, but Iran is a major player behind the scenes with the Hezbollah fighting in Lebanon and Syria for 3 decades. So that's not new. Iran is also behind Yemen, which is the foe, the neighbor, being raped and pillaged and murdered with genocide by the Saudis with the help of the United States. So I'm watching China and the Saudis, but there's something else very big going on, and it deserves a quick 1-minute mention. The Saudis have signed a deal to supply Russia with oil. And if you're wondering why would the Russians want to buy Saudi oil, the reason is simple. They want to set up the Rosneft oil consortium to bury forever OPEC. OPEC is the dollar mechanism used by the Americans and the Saudis to set the world stage and the standard for petro sales in the dollar. It is dead. If they have meetings in Austria, in Vienna, Austria, for OPEC, it's for one reason and one reason only: to get out of town in the Arab world and to go have some fun with the Austrian and European hookers. No other reason for an OPEC meeting in Vienna. They cannot even honor their agreements. Nigeria is in direct violation of output limitations. The Saudis are honoring it, but why would the Saudis sell oil to Russia? Easy. That way, when Russia sells it in dollar terms, the Saudis will say, we didn't sell it in dollar terms, the Russians did. And the Russian Rosneft has to manage two technical challenges, which are contamination levels and viscosity levels. Okay, so these are the side issues, but the real big cut coming is the agreement the Saudis are going to make with China to allow sales to be paid for oil in RMB terms. The United States, I think, will hail missiles on the Saudis and blame it on ISIS in response. Oh. That's how dangerous it is.
Interesting. Yeah, in either way, I mean, we were talking about a 25 to 35% reduction in demand for the dollar. How does that not dollar bearish, right?
It's dollar bearish, but the dollar bull lives in the Exchange Stabilization Fund at the Department of Treasury. Okay, just a simple point. In the last 2 years, there's been an average. They monitor it with the average of the last 12 months, the last 12 months of dollar sales in the form of Treasury bonds. It's been running 300 to 400 billion for the last 12 months, for the last year or more, which means that over a 12-month stretch, move forward another month, okay, drop off the end month, move on a new month. What's the 12-month average, 12-month sum for that? It's 300 to 400 billion steadily for the last 12 months on a running basis. Oh, where's the big effect in the bond market? It's being lapped up by interest rate swap derivatives, which depends, by the way, this is a very interesting point, which depends on the 0% feeder system. Doesn't cost any money to move that money in, move the funds in to the Exchange Stabilization Fund, the derivative mechanisms. It's long-term versus short-term and coupons versus non-coupons. There's a lot of shenanigans in there, and out comes, oops, how about that? The feeder system feeds in free money, and out comes demand for the 10-year and the 30-year bond. Okay, it depends on the free money, but they're raising interest rates. So I'm expecting a derivative accident. Now, you call it dollar bearish. It is dollar bearish, but more than dollar bearish, it's high risk for the derivative machinery, in particular the interest rate swap derivatives that create the fabricated bond demand to offset all the dumping of treasury bonds. And when China signed a deal with the United States to buy Alaskan oil, and they lay down some bonds in order to build a pipeline or to do something, improve a port facility, these are near-term future events, they're going to be dumping treasuries. Who's the buyer? The Exchange Stabilization Fund via derivatives with the interest rate swap derivatives that depend on 0% free money on the feeder system. There's your risk.
Well, that's actually an excellent segue into the first emailed question, Jim, because, and I think we'll go in that direction. Again, for anybody listening, click the questions tab on your GoToWebinar control panel, and you can type in a question. It will come to me, and we'll get to them here a little bit later on. But first, I've got 4 questions that were emailed to me from folks that couldn't attend. And I think, again, we'll use that where you left off as a segue to the first one, because, it's very curious at this moment in time, Jim. The Fed keeps trying to hike the Fed funds rate. The 2-year note is up to almost 2.3%. LIBOR is going through the roof, but yet the long end of the curve maybe collapsing is too strong of a term, but the 10-year note has fallen from 294 to 274 in just the past week. Long bond got all the way up to 312 or something like that. No, more than that, 321, and it's under 3% this morning. And so Dorian's question, and I'll just let you interpret this. I'll just read it to you. You can take it wherever you want. She says, please ask Jim if the Fed will ever lose control of interest rates. And as this has gone on longer than many people could imagine, and if they do lose control, what would cause this? And I guess that's mainly talking about the derivative structure that you're talking about.
Oh boy, there are a lot of causes for lost control. The dumping that I cited, foreign central banks dumping treasury bonds out of disgust or out of a need to purchase something like a pipeline or a port facility. Okay, that's called indirect exchange. It's called indirect because it would be China paying money in the form of treasury bonds to, say, a German contractor or a Russian contractor to build something. Okay, so dumping of treasury bond, that's one contributing factor to losing control. The high deficits. It's rumored that we're going to hit $1.5 trillion this year. They've already announced that they're going to have over $1 trillion in auctions. So if we have failed auctions, that's going to be a problem. With respect to derivatives, it's a function of leverage. They're asking Wall Street banks to reduce their asset base, but increase their treasury bond holdings. And they've got these giant 100-to-1 or so leverage factors working to support the treasuries. Meanwhile, the Fed is holding $4 trillion worth, about 2.5 in mortgage bond trash, toxic paper, supporting the housing market, and about $1 trillion or a little more in treasury bonds, which is now becoming widely recognized as unpayable, which means the U.S. is slowly crossing a line into a status where we're recognized as third world. Trillion-dollar deficits never to be paid back, dependent upon derivatives and fabricated bond demand. Wow! What could go wrong?
Right.
So you get bond dumping, federal deficits, failed auctions, and leverage in the banks. I think we're going to see sometime this year an event, and I cannot put a face on the event. Craig, I think we're going to see an event where derivatives start to blow up and they deny it. It'll be seen in, okay, here's an example of what could happen. The 30-year bond zips up to 4.7%, and 4 days later it comes back under 4% and settles at 3.8. And then it does it again 3 weeks later, and questions come, and the government said, oh, nothing to see, keep moving along. Okay, that's a derivative breakdown. That's like smoke in the room coming out the windows, and people notice it a second time. Another example of a blow up would be one of the Wall Street banks. For instance, the pet bank for derivatives, Morgan Stanley. They've been the little lackey harlot whore for years. But since Lehman, other banks are trying to take the load off Morgan Stanley and spread it around. It's what I call lashing together. So if any one goes down, they all go down. Therefore, none will go down. But if the entire system is at risk, they all go down together. But I still think one of them has been set aside to do yeoman's work. And I think it's Morgan Stanley. I don't really know Who on earth knows? I think they falsify their books to make it very obscure. So the other example could be Morgan Stanley suddenly has a big quadrupling in their credit default swap, announces at a quarterly meeting a big ass problem with some toxic paper, some big write-downs, and they don't know how they're going to handle it. Then suddenly the Fed comes in and patches it, and then everything's back to normal. Okay, these are a couple of events that could happen. We're going to see something in the derivative world, Greg.
Yeah, it's almost inevitable. You're right. And that's all part of, it seems, is what the Fed is trying to juggle, because if long rates keep going higher, it just stresses that structure that you said to such a great degree.
That, but it's the leverage of the banks holding those bonds. You know, since they started raising rates about a year ago or a little more, the leverage in those banks has been even more. And you see that with the diddling and fiddling with the reverse repo rate.
Okay, let me move on. And again, these questions are always going to jump around because people just send them in.
Sure.
Ron sent me a list of 4. I'm just going to save time, I'm just going to pick off a couple and combine them. He wants to know, one, if the U.S. can ever get out from under or turn around, let's put it that way, the trade deficit situation. We're importing far more than we export. Is there any way, or does that just always lead to a consistently lower standard of living? And then when England lost their reserve currency of the pound, that the pound fell dramatically over the next several decades, but it played out over time. Do you think instead the dollar would just be a kind of an overnight revaluation instead?
Okay, those are two
questions.
Okay, first, the trade deficit is very structural and is getting worse. Last year was $550 billion for the year. We are on track for something a good deal higher this year. It could be something like 620 or 650 billion. Okay, to put this into terms that are more tangible, that 550 translates to 13,000 tons of gold. Okay, that's what happens if we do the stupid ass move where the monkeys in Washington decide we're going to get real and back the dollar with gold, and we're going to borrow Japanese and Chinese and Russian gold. Yeah, right. And lose 13,000 in the first year. Therefore, it will never happen. Trump ran on a campaign initiative of reindustrializing the United States and beginning with $1 trillion infrastructure upgrade. How's that going? Exactly nothing. That's why.
I thought maybe I lost you for a second. Exactly.
No, exactly. I love the pregnant pause. It's very determinate.
That was very pregnant.
Right.
Hey, I don't want to interrupt you, but let me back you up. I mean, what if you're going to value gold that way, if you increased the dollar price, the set price of gold by 10 times, then maybe you'd only be talking about 1,300 tons instead of 13,000.
Yeah, well, we're not going to go 10 times until we go double. Okay. When we go double, then it would be 6,500 tons of gold, which, by the way, is pretty close to what Fort Knox held for all those years, which
Allegedly.
is still a very big figure if we have $2,500 gold. So we're still in the same hot water. In 2 years, you lose the same amount. If you go suddenly up to 8,000 gold and you're up, what is that, 6 times, 7 times? Okay, then you're talking about 2,000 or 3,000 tons of gold a year. In 4 years, you've lost more than what Fort Knox contained. The big condition is to create 30,000 new businesses a year as a national emergency project, inviting foreign capital with tax breaks on income profits and tax breaks on property tax. 30,000 per year. But no one wants to sign up because the United States is embroiled in pedophilia, bond fraud, market rigging, war crimes, and all kinds of other sanctions and other horse shit, like trade war. Why
Right.
would any foreign country want to invest in the United States when we're going after our number one creditor in China with a trade war? How insane is that? Furthermore, Japan has become the number one foreign bondholder. They're just a few billion ahead of the Chinese right now, but I think the Chinese have a lot of swaps at work, and their actual vulnerability and exposure to treasury bonds is much less. But the Japanese, according to Euroraj, are dumping treasuries and buying gold and filling up their banking system. I think soon we're going to see Japan being labeled a terrorist nation.
Yeah, that'll be next.
I'm not making a joke. Any nation that dumps treasuries for some purpose that attacks the dollar has been labeled a terrorist rogue nation for the last two decades. Okay, unless and until we reindustrialize and even start the program, make the rules. Okay, many people thought mistakenly, well, isn't repatriating $1 trillion or more, hundreds of billions, repatriating them and lowering the tax by the ferrymen for bringing it in, isn't that going to help the United States to alleviate its trade deficit? To which I say, hell no, where have you been? 2007, case point, no new business investment, just executive compensation packages enhanced, just stock buybacks enhanced, just dividends enhanced, directly against the advice from the U.S. government at the time with zero consequences. We don't even know how to enforce the rules. We don't even know how to make the rules. We don't even know how to attract the money. We don't even know what capitalism is, Craig. We have now labeled capitalism as something vile. Just listen to that absolute moron Pelosi make comments about the right of the government to confiscate income for the good of the people. No, we have ingrained socialism now in our system to the point where we don't even know how to reindustrialize. So before we reindustrialize and address trade deficit, we need to have our minds changed. We need to get the Keynesians out of the room. We need to get Austrian economists in the room. We need to worry about how honest money can be set up. We need to worry about how foreign capital can be brought in without abusing them. The new dollar
That would be
is going to be slower in arriving than I once thought than I thought recently in the last several months. The dual universe is going to be a very big phenomenon where the dollar commands 2/3, 3/4 of world trade payments and bank reserves, more than that, bank reserves, but it just gets whittled down by the RMB. And when the RMB by China and the ruble of Russia announce a gold backing of whatever type, however limited, you can accelerate the attrition for the dollar in global trade and in banking reserves. So it's going to be a process. I had an interesting discussion with a Costa Rican native, a couple of them, over dinner 2 nights ago. And they said, Jim, do you think this will be a 10-year process, longer, or I think you're going to say less? And I said, it's going to be less. And if you're pretty certain that it's going to be 4 or 5 years, then it's going to be less, because there are other things that are very difficult to factor in, like lost confidence. The dollar is a fiat currency dependent on confidence and fear. Don't ever leave out the fear of war and sanctions. That's very real. But I think the momentum is going to grow in a way that we can't anticipate, Craig. And I thought a while back we're going to see the new Scheist dollar probably in 2018 sometime. I don't know. I don't really think so. I think by the end of this year we're going to see a lot of advancement by the R&B platforms, Belt and Road projects. Right now, they got $8 trillion worth of projects, and not a single one will be in the dollar.
Yeah.
So it's not just oil trade that's going to threaten the dollar. It's going to be construction project. The word infrastructure is a bit hackneyed, overused. Think of it as highways, bridges, port facilities, office parks, manufacturing sites where the actual product and the retooling has not entered yet. Like a mill. Okay, an empty mill. Okay, these are part of what's coming with the Belt and Road. And along with that, railroads and standards being set. I mean, there's a railroad that's used in Asia that's very small. It's like a foot and a half less in diameter than the standard railroad. Okay, I mean, it's like, I think of it as a little kiddie railroad. Well, it's not so much
a little thin
railroad.
gauge.
Huh?
It's a thinner gauge, yeah.
It's a thinner
the
gauge,
rails.
but it's not for moving coal. It's not for moving grain. Not for moving tractors.
Right.
Not for moving automobiles and trucks and containers, like for back of trucks. It's for moving people. It's for moving a carload of 35 people, narrow track. Okay. The Belt and Road Initiative is going to standardize things like that. And these are not simple tasks. Okay, so there's a lot going on. I think that the new dollar is going to come about only when we have problems importing to the United States. When countries say, we don't want the Treasury bill, that's the only thing you're offering for a big container vessel from Korea. So we're not going to sell it to you in Los Angeles and deliver it there anymore. We're going to be sending it instead to Brazil.
Well, let me use that as a segue to a question from Bill, Jim. And it sounds to me like Bill has a vested interest in this. And you touched upon this just a couple of minutes ago. Bill says, please ask Jim what he thinks will happen to expats and their property in places like Costa Rica and Panama if the dollar goes that way, i.e., the dollar is used as a primary currency in both countries at present. Does he think that expats will be in danger of expropriation should this happen?
I honestly don't know. I could venture some speculation. I'm concerned more about confiscation of dollar accounts. I'll give you an example. This is very real in my life. My father's 98. He's been talking every single time I phone him. It's about once or twice a month. Every single time he discusses the status of the inheritance. It's like he wants me to stay current because that might be the last phone call. And I'm concerned, well, my gosh, if I move, I'm not going to mention the amount. If I move a big ass stack of money, how's that going to work out here? I really don't know. Well, so I've been asking around. I got a local guy who's a very competent accountant, and he turned me on in the process of getting a reference. I said, well, look, Martine, how can I get a reference? And he said, well, you know this hotel. And I said, yeah, I know that hotel. I've been there. I've been taking dinner there many times. Okay, talk to the manager there. Talk to Frank. I said, okay. I said, why? Frank's your client? He said, yeah. So I talked to Frank, and Frank told me, Jim, I got to warn you. I moved like $500,000 2 years ago with Martin's help. And I moved it from Minnesota to San Jose here. It took 3 or 4 months, and it took like 20 hours of accountant and legal work. And it was the biggest GD screw up I have ever imagined. So not only is it difficult to move money of large volume, accused by, the Bush Clinton types of being terrorist money. So you got to fill out the anti-terrorist disclaimers, right? Okay, this is my mother's inheritance, you idiots. No, everything's terrorist money. They want to, seize it if they can make any kind of accusation stick. Well, your mother was involved with, gold coins. Your mother was involved with the National Rifle Association. She owned 3 rifles. Well, yeah, she hunted skeet Oh my gosh. We're just a pack of government morons is what we are. Criminal morons. I really don't know what they're going to do. I'm expecting they're going to do something, and they're very unpredictable.
Yeah.
And here's kind of a saving grace. Panama and Costa Rica are very much in the U.S. camp. So whatever happens of a vile sort will happen elsewhere first. Like in Ecuador. We don't run Ecuador. Like in Chile. We don't run Chile. Like in Argentina. Look what's happening in Argentina. It's illegal to even have a dollar account. I don't know. I mean, take a look at what happened in Singapore. That's a good example because they're fair. And they make friends everywhere. They're trying to become a solution to everybody and a market for whoever. And they're doing a good job with it. They got a rival in Hong Kong, and they don't lodge virus attacks on Hong Kong. They have conferences to work out differences and to get along. How un-American is that? I don't know what's going to happen. I'm expecting something, and that's why I don't have a bank account with a lot of money in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
So if these effing clowns want to seize something, they can seize all $712.
That's probably the wisest thing to do, my friend. And you are a wise old gentleman. That's no doubt about that. Let me ask you one last question. And again, anybody that wants to submit a question for Jim, just click the questions tab on your GoToWebinar control panel. I've got a couple of them waiting there for you. But the last one that was emailed to me came from Chris. I know this is not one of your favorite topics, so you can just pass or you can do whatever you want with it, but I've got to ask it. Chris wants to know if you have any insights on what is going on in North Korea and the visit of Kim to China.
I hear, not just from Ben Fulford, I hear elsewhere that unification could happen along the lines of Germany. I'm hearing that Trump is being given credit for something that China did behind the scenes. I'm hearing that the Bush family is a little bit panicked because they got 70 tons of heroin that they produce in North Korea each year. I'm hearing that the Bush crime family has more amphetamines in dollar value than they do heroin. I don't know what's going on in North Korea. Something happened in just the last several weeks that never happened to me before, not once in my life. I missed the Winter Olympics. Oops.
What were you doing? Yeah, what were you doing?
Well, bear in mind that there's no snow skiing in Costa Rica. And ice skating is, there is one ice skating rink in San Jose, and it's kind of a funny thing to see. But they skate on roller skates and on inline skates. That's what they are really good at here. I go down to Sabana Park once in a while on my bicycle on a Sunday. And a destination is just to see the rollerdrome, to look at the racers on their inline skates. Ice skating, no. Snow skating, no. Hockey, you kidding me? No, everything is soccer here. Football. Everything. They convert a basketball court into a soccer field for kids on cement. It's funny to see. You got a basketball rim, and the basket is all stripped down, of the string or chain, whatever string, usually nylon. So you got an empty rim, and you got the shortened sized goal for soccer football. And little kids are playing with a small football. And I missed. Okay, North Korea. Honestly, let me state this more frankly. I don't give a shit about North Korea. I never have.
That's what I was looking for.
And I don't think I ever will. And if they ever become a prominent item of reality, it's going to be how much debt the South Koreans have absorbed to fix it, on a scale much bigger than Germany fixing East Germany and absorbing that.
Yeah. Well, and what do you think in terms of the One Belt I guess, as a big picture, or China as a kind of regional hegemon? A lot of times people have said, that South Korea, North Korea thing is, I guess, a lever versus China, Taiwan. So if South Korea, North Korea get back together, I mean, do you think there's something there where, okay, China says, okay, look, U.S. will help you out with this North Korea problem, so you don't have to worry about it anymore, but you're going to help us out, and you're going to stand down from Taiwan. I mean, do you think there's any tit for tat there?
Absolutely huge. Yes, very big, very big. Just think in terms of military contractors. Do you think we've got a bit of equipment sitting on the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea? A few tanks, trucks, maybe a few artillery, a few rifles. We never back down from an opportunity to create conflict. It's one of the biggest cancers on the United States in the last century. Trump is using Taiwan. He had a meeting. I think it's coming up very soon with the Taiwanese leader. The Chinese are just ripshit mad, angry. I don't know how it's going to turn out. For me, the biggest question about North Korea, the questions are the following. What happens to the Bush heroin? What happens to the Bush family amphetamines? If you don't think amphetamines are important, then you don't know what happened in Kiev, Ukraine, to turn the tide, which was loaded in the Maidan Square with free passed out amphetamines. Okay? Other question regarding North Korea. What's going to happen to the, 200,000 troops we've got there?
Allegedly 35 or 40.
Well, yeah, that's what I said. 200,000? What's going to happen with the plan for South Korea and Seoul to absorb it and to industrialize it, to educate it, to clean it up, to end the poverty, to end the starvation? I think it's going to be a bigger debt than what Germany took in with East Germany, where they, helped their brothers. Okay, the Koreans can help their brothers and sisters. And, it's all well and good, but I don't know where the allegiance will lie with respect to this joint Korean nation. Will they maintain really good relations with China and the United States? And Japan, for that matter? Because right now there's a big travel restriction in China for Koreans. They're not friends. There's some incidents occurred. I just got a warning that I could get an update in my antivirus from the evil empire at Microsoft. No, thank you.
Hey, lucky.
Lucky me. Boy, I tell you, I'll take this opportunity to say I absolutely hate Windows 10. I did not ask for it. It automatically came overnight in an upgrade, download. I do not like it. It does not work well. I can list 20 flaws with it, and I'm considering an expensive move to Apple. Thank you very much. So North Korea is like a big wart that's bleeding, and it might become transformed into a ping pong ball with respect to Taiwan. I don't know. I don't know why the Chinese are so bent out of shape over Taiwan. I really don't. Let them do whatever they want to do. Who cares? They're just a bunch of, wealthy and educated Chinese who wanted to get away from communism. If you want to end Taiwan conflict, increase trade with Taiwan. Increase intellectual property transfers. Increase Taiwanese companies setting up shop all across China. Set up cultural groups. But the nonsense with the Dalai Lama and Nepal and Tibet and Taiwan, my gosh, it's as stupid as the South China Sea islands that the United States likes to whip up. Okay, let's move on. I don't give a shit about North Korea. And I've ignored their news for 20 years, and I've never missed anything.
No, you're right. That's why I framed the question the way I did. All right.
Pay attention to it, though, Craig. This might be different. If we're going to do an evacuation of 90% of American military troops, that's going to be big. If at the same time South Korea announces a $100 billion unification program for reconstruction and education. Ooh, okay, that's real.
We'll see how that goes. Yeah. All right. To the listener questions. And again, I've got 3 or 4 in queue. If there's anything you want to ask Jim, type it in, click the questions tab, and it comes straight to me and I pass it on. First from Brent, who hears the term used a lot about global reset. Global reset. In your mind, what does that mean?
Global reset is a euphemism, a nice sounding, pleasant term for killing the dollar as a global reserve currency and trade payment standard. Global reset is a euphemism for reinstalling the gold standard and killing off the dollar. Global reset is a euphemism for changing the entire banking system across the world, removing the treasury bond trash and replacing it with gold and some Chinese government bonds. Global reset is a euphemism for eradicating the US-based financial hegemony, like FATCA, like sanctions for any country that wants to trade energy outside the dollar.
SWIFT.
Global reset is essentially a return to the gold standard and a retirement of the dollar.
Well, let me ask you this. This is the second part of Brent's question then. And I think what he's getting at, he says, what do you think of this idea of a silver Russian ruble? Or let me frame that a different way though. You know, Russia consistently is importing and converting their foreign currency reserves into gold at the tune of 25, 28 metric tons a month. They're now the 4th largest sovereign holding nation. What are they doing with that, Jim? I mean, ultimately they can back their currency with it if they want, almost on a one-to-one basis. I mean, what are they going to launch a silver Russian ruble or a gold ruble? Or are they going to? Is it because they anticipate that's where the system is going eventually? What do you think they're doing there?
I'll get to the silver ruble in a minute, but this, what did you say, 200 tons a month?
It's about 25 to 28.
Oh, sorry, 25, off by a factor of 10. 25 tons a month. Well, they're adding to their 30,000 tons another 20 or 25 a month.
Yeah, good point.
Where should the emphasis be? On the incremental tidbit or on the giant hoard under the Kremlin walls? 30,000 tons of gold in the Kremlin, and The Voice actually saw it in the 1990s when he did some work to clean up the mess that Boris Yeltsin created.
So we have firsthand evidence. He was there, he saw it and went, whoa, that had to be something to see.
Well, he said, you know, it's not like you walk past it and say, wow, that was impressive. No, you walk past about 18 different rooms. It takes half an hour. 30,000 tons is approximately 5 times or 4 times what Fort Knox had.
Right.
Okay? All under the Kremlin in vaults, very secure vaults. Okay, I don't believe, for every time I read a story about official gold reserves, I giggle. I giggle and snicker like a little girl. No, I snicker and giggle like a little girl. I really do, Craig. It's just amazing how much attention is given to something so stupid, inane, and falsified. The Chinese have somewhere between 25 and 70,000 tons of gold. So who gives a backward flying, dried rat shit about their official central bank gold reserves when their SAFE gold reserves might be 5 to 8 times larger, and when their private elder families hold perhaps over 100,000 tons? So who cares about the official?
Yeah.
Okay, regarding the Russian ruble, and the silver backing. As preface, I'll say this. A year and a half ago, hat-trick letter client and, semi-buddy, Hugo Salinas Price of Mexico. He's in his 80s, and he's still active. He's very bilingual. For all I know, he's trilingual with German. I don't know. Maybe I think he told me he doesn't speak any Russian at all. But he went to the Kremlin on invitation a year and a half ago to give them the sales pitch on the wisdom of setting up a silver-backed ruble and making it pretty much along the same model of what he presented to the Mexican Parliament. I don't know the name of their Mexican Parliament. And
Right.
in Mexico, here's how it was presented and currently stands. If they come to a silver-backed coin called the Libertad, which means liberty, if their silver liberty comes into being, then it would be managed by their big banks in Mexico City and their branch outlets across the country, and would be used for private citizens' savings accounts, not as currency. So issuing a gold or silver-backed coin does not necessarily imply that it would be used as currency. It means it would be a form of money. No, the bridge would be money being used as legal tender. So they could obstruct the usage as legal tender, but still make it a savings vehicle. Okay. When I asked the voice, I don't have the quote in front of me, but it was a short response. I know exactly what he said in content, not the exact words. I asked the voice because he still has some Russian connections. He has far more connections in Hong Kong and that part of the world and in the Arab world. But his response to the question, is this for real, sir? And what can you tell us about it? He said, yes, it is real. I can tell you that for sure. The Russians will proceed. It will take a form not well anticipated. There'll be some surprises in the way it gets rolled out. Okay, well, I don't think he was at liberty to say much more. He, in the last 5 years, unfortunately for me, he has said less in sharing information, but what he says is far more important because they're critical matters that result in a change like the global currency reset, installation of the gold standard, retirement of the dollar as global currency reserve. These are very big events that happen typically every 40 or 80 years. So, yeah, the silver ruble is going to be real. If I had to guess, I'd say it's going to be in the form of a savings device for Russian citizens. And furthermore, it might back a certain cryptocurrency, which would make it qualify as crypto money. Because I think crypto money is going to bury cryptocurrency. By that I mean the crypto devices and vehicles that are backed by gold, silver, and other hard assets like petroleum. Maybe even like platinum or diamonds. I don't know. Just think of hard assets with a core of precious metals and oil, and maybe natural gas too. Those cryptos are going to become the dominant ones and attract the money because they're going to be more legitimate, but they will also invite some new, very difficult questions like auditing by independents and like custodial duties, location, vault, inspection, audit, where?
Right.
Very big question.
And Jim, just to back up too, you'd mentioned to me before we got started that The Voice, this friend of yours for now quite a long time, had said that this, I think if I remember what you said, that the yuan denominated crude oil contract would basically start the countdown, something like that. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, it's where rubber hits the road for oil sales, not in the dollar. It makes a financial formality for that process. In the past, Iran could sell oil in euros, face sanctions, deal with three-way deals, engage in three-way deals like with India and Turkey for oil to be used
And gold.
in transactions for gold bullion and smuggling. Okay, this formalizes the oil payments in RMB. This creates a channel. This creates a competitor for Brent and West Texas crude, and Ural oil for the Russians, and St. Pete oil for the Russians. The Russians are applauding this. It's more competition for the US and British, well, European, oil standard benchmarks. And that's what I'm watching. How are they going to differ from the standard US and European benchmarks? And we got to watch it. It's not so evident immediately. So when the Chinese come up with this, I'm having little hiccups. When the Chinese come up with the formal channel for RMB oil, I ask, who's going to use it? And I think the Saudis are going to have it forced down their throats. Then I think Algeria, UAE, Iraq, and Kuwait are also going to have it forced down their throats. Why do I mention those countries? Because that's where the Chinese are now having incremental, big contributions for foreign direct investment in drilling, in refineries, in port facilities for shipping, and in equipment. Okay? And concession rights. I just had that detailed in a public article and in a summary in the March newsletter, the Hat Trick Letter. Okay, so you've got to see countries engage and use this contract. And there's another side to that. Let's suppose an Arab nation has a surplus, and with the higher oil price, they start to see a little bit more of a repair in their deficits, and they get a surplus, and they decide, well, we're going to convert a portion of our surplus not into treasury dollars anymore, because we've got infiltration of nasty types from ISIS all through our country, and we're dead sure they're coming from Washington, and arms are being shipped from the United States through the Saudis and undermining our society, our economy, and our political structure with very thin cover, US and Israel behind ISIS. So instead, a country like Algeria will buy some gold. Okay, and that's where I think the gold trade note is going to start coming into view. The other contract that's been in Shanghai for a while is the oil gold contract. My gosh, if that doesn't just scream out gold trade note for trade payment, I don't know what does. You buy oil, you guarantee it with an equity purchase and investment in gold bullion. Upon the delivery, you settle it out, you work out quarterly net, you maybe roll it over, you deliver some gold, and you move forward. Okay, so the RMB oil contract undermines the petrodollar for the monopoly and dollar-based oil sales. But I think the oil gold Shanghai contract is going to spawn the gold trade note, which will work side by side with the petro RMB contract, and just undermine the dollar and just lay out seeds across the entire globe for the gold standard. That's what the reset is.
Yeah, that explains it, ties it all together.
I'm sorry, you go ahead. Go ahead.
No, that ties it all together. No, you're absolutely right. I didn't mean, go ahead. They said they do not want to what?
They do not want to have the Washington Post, New York Times, Barron's, and Wall Street Journal have articles talking about the return of the gold standard. So they're going to keep you confused by talking about a global reset. By the way, there were 105 nations, 107 nations who signed in January of 2004 14, I believe, right before the Ukraine war. Okay? They signed a global currency reset treaty. It had a different name, but that was the essence of it. The United States signed it in January of the same year, where 1 month later, they instigated the Ukraine war. So we have the blueprint. It's been around for 4 years.
Yeah.
And now with Ukraine stalled and with the United States not even attending Minsk truce agreements and then dishonoring them through the signatories who are our allies, you could basically say Ukraine has bogged down, especially given that the Germans have signed the Nord Stream 2 construction project. They signed it this week. All the permits are now granted. The only nation that's in doubt is Denmark, and the Russians have told Denmark, you want to screw around, we'll work around you, and you will get no transit fees. Play the U.S. game, and you're going to be missing out on income, you idiots.
Yeah, while that gas part was a big part of it.
Right. And on the other side, the south, the Turkish stream has been pretty much a success, and since the failed U.S. assassination attempt and coup on Erdogan of Turkey, the Russians and the Turks have been moving balls to the wall, full speed ahead with the pipeline. And while there was any doubt, while there was delay and a moratorium on all this, I'm told that a lot of pipeline pipe was stuck as storage in Bulgaria right nearby, so it wouldn't be very hard to pick up where they left off. So, once again, I've been making this statement for a long time. Every single U.S. foreign policy initiative has been a grotesque failure. Move that on into the trade war front, where China just abandoned a grain deal with the U.S. and signed it with Russia. China just abandoned a soybean deal with the United States and signed it instead with Brazil. Who lost out on that, China or the United States?
Jim, let me ask you one last question, and then we'll move to wrap up. I've got one last question in queue, and this should be a pretty simple one. This comes from Thomas, who just wants to know, he says, you have mentioned, as have Rob Kirby, the increased difficulty in getting physical gold in size. We've talked about that for several years now. Have you heard anything? Does that continue, or is that easing a little bit?
I don't think it's really changed. But given the fewer conversations I have with the voice on direct matters like that, I can only go by what he said about 8 or 10 months ago, where there was a 20% premium paid on like $150 million gold purchase. But if there are brokers who are savvy enough to have connections with, say, South American producers or African producers or Canadian producers, they can go and get a direct shipment from the refineries to fill an order and not have to deal with the marketplace. And that's where your clever brokers are operating. I think that those brokers who saw obstacles in the last few years in obtaining size are now going straight to the Peruvian refiner.
That makes sense.
Well, yeah, and I know of an actual story where one is going straight to a Canadian refiner recently.
Well, all right, Jim, I'll tell you what, why don't we just stop there, because we've cleaned out all the email questions, we've cleaned out all of the attendee questions. And everybody listening knows what happens next. We get to the final 4. These are my questions, but they're just 4 quickies. You can usually answer them, in just a couple of words or a couple of sentences, but it's a fun way to wrap up. So, all right, here you go. Question number 1, which comes first, Dow 20,000 going back down or Dow 30,000 going back up?
I tend to think 20,000. I think they're going to have troubles. The boys in Wall Street, who have control of the Department of Treasury for national security purposes, are going to have a tough choice. Do we protect the bond market or do we protect the stock market? We can't protect them both. So they're going to protect the U.S. government debt in the form of treasury bonds, drive down the interest rates, but there are not going to be enough stupid people to enter the stock market again, so it's going to start to decay.
Fair enough. All right, I know you're a basketball fan. It's Easter weekend, but it's also Final Four weekend. You're probably like everybody else. Your bracket's been blown up, but who do you got winning the tournament? Who's going to prevail on Monday?
I'm going to be honest with you. I know about Villanova, and I don't know who the other three are.
Well, we'll go with Villanova. They're odds-on to win, so we'll go with that.
I don't know who the other ones are. Is Duke in there?
No, it's Villanova, Kansas, Michigan, and Illinois, Chicago. Or I'm sorry, Loyola, Chicago.
How about that? Okay, I didn't know
Loyola, Chicago, different school, Jesuit school.
Yeah. Oh, Loyola. Yes, the Cinderella. I saw a little bit of their action. I saw the Kansas finale. I think that went overtime. Right. I think they beat Kentucky. I smiled at that one. I don't like Duke or Kentucky. I'm sorry, I'm just biased. I don't like Duke or Kentucky. That's the way I am. I'm a North Carolina fan, therefore I don't like Duke. I didn't like the dominance of Kentucky, where they thought they were, God's gift to basketball for the longest time. I don't really know. I don't really care. I just want to have some nice downtime, have a good meal, watch it with a friend. Maybe see some booty walk by. I don't know. I just want to have a diversion because I'm a bit stressed out.
We all are.
I'd like to see Villanova win, tell you the truth. Not because they're from my home state of Pennsylvania. I just like their program. I like to see Eastern kids with an opportunity to shine. I'm a fan of the East. Although I went to college in Ohio, I'm still an Eastern guy. I went to Boston for 20 years in my career. I went to a lot of Red Sox games. I saw quite a few Celtic games, and I had a friend who had a season ticket to the Patriots. So he gave me one, but I was the wild card. He said, Jim, I've got season tickets. It's 8 home games. If someone is a no-show, can I count on you on a Sunday morning to go see the Patriots with me? And I said, hell yeah. So every year, at least one time, I was the wild card. So I'm an Eastern guy. I want to see the Eastern teams do well. And there are not a lot of real big Northeast powers in any football or basketball. They tend to get raided by Michigan and Ohio and the Florida schools and Penn State power.
All right, well, that's an excellent segue, frankly, to Final Four question number 3. Again, it's Thursday, March 29th as we record. Baseball season kicks off today, my friend, if you can believe that. It's still March, but they're going to try to play baseball. Given what you've just said about your allegiance to the Northeast, probably guess the answer to this, but it's baseball season. Who's your favorite baseball team? Who do you pull for?
Well, I've been here a number of years in Costa Rica, 11 years, so I'm starting to see a slippage in my loyalty to the Red Sox. When I was there, Pedro Martinez won 2 Cy Young Awards. I mean, that's a while back.
Yeah.
That was the late 90s. I mean, we used to call him Pedrolito. And you'd go and you'd see a little section with the Dominican flags. And then after that, it was David Ortiz in the last decade, and he's retired. So they got a whole new crew, and I'm not a big Boston Red Sox fan. I'm glad they won the World Series twice in the 2000 decade. That was a lot of fun, especially taking out the Yankees the way they did. I will always hate the Yankees, though. I just hate them and their ex-owner. I hate their arrogance. I hate their New York City location. I can honestly tell you something. This is a strange tidbit to close on. In my career and in my graduate school years, so between 75 and 2000, I met approximately 50 people from New York professionally, school and career job, projects, in my department, in neighboring department, at the lunch table, a client up in New Hampshire, whatever. I knew about 50 people from New York. Okay? I liked 2. The rest I actively disliked. I actively avoided them. The most obnoxious people on the planet. So I don't pull for New York Yankees. I don't pull for New York Giants. I don't pull for the New York Jets. Those are direct rivals to the Patriots. And I don't really have an opinion on the Mets. I kind of like the Mets. I think they're always, feisty. And yeah, they were rivals with my Pirates when I was growing up. But so what? I like Tom Seaver. I thought Seaver was class. His wife was a bit of an idiot. No, there's stories.
I still don't think I've heard who your favorite team is. You've talked for 5 minutes, and I still haven't heard who your favorite team is.
I don't have a favorite baseball team. I love watching the sport. I enjoyed how Houston won. I really enjoyed how Houston won. I didn't think they were going to pull it off, but they did. They didn't have the experience in October, but they won, and that was great. I didn't think they were going to beat the Yankees. The Yankees are a young team, but, they still got the New York arrogance, and their high salaries inhibit their good play. I like the, what's the name of the little guy in Houston who's
Altuve.
Altuve, he's about 5'4". He's a power pack.
Right.
I thought he was going to get the MVP, but he did not. A guy named Springer, the center fielder, just got too many critical home runs. It was a lot of fun. It was a great World Series. I didn't care who won. I just didn't want the Yankees to win. I like the Yankees not to make it to the playoffs. That way you don't have to worry about them. But, they got good scouts, so they're always with young players. I mean, where'd they find this 6'7" guy? Oh, gosh, what's his name? Judge.
Yeah. Judge, yeah.
Where'd they find him? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
And they got a great young catcher, another Latino. I like the Latinos in baseball because when I was a kid, Pittsburgh Pirates, it was Roberto Clemente. Then there was a batting champion, Mateo Alou. I'm dating myself, but that's the 60s.
Yeah.
And I went to Forbes Field, and this is really going back. I went to 200 games at Forbes Field. I went to about 80 at Three River Stadium. I was actually at the inauguration of Three River Stadium in 1969 selling hot dogs. Just finished high school, and I was a hot dog vendor. Hot dogs here, hot dog. Yeah, can you imagine?
You've always been a hard-working guy, my friend.
Well, I've always been a hustler, but back then, that was when I had hair.
All right, I got one last final four question for you.
How many more?
This is the last one.
Go ahead.
This is the last one. This is number 4, and it gets back to the stock market. Which will be the first to zero, DB or FB, meaning Deutsche Bank or Facebook?
Well, how about we change the question to single digits?
Okay.
Well, Deutsche Bank is very close to single digits right now. Facebook, yeah. I don't know what Facebook's price is, but if it's under 70 or 100, I'd be surprised.
So we're gonna go with Deutsche Bank, probably.
I think Deutsche Bank is the first to fail. But I'll tell you why. They're the outsourced derivative shop from Wall Street, and that's where I'm expecting to see smoke and fire. But it's also going to be heavily defended by the Euro Central Bank. Don't be surprised if they become a secret buyer of the Deutsche Bank stock. They start with their bonds, move to preferred stock, and then buy the regular stock. The derivatives are in trouble, and of all the European banks, Deutsche Bank might possibly have over 75% of all the contracts under their roof. Whereas in the United States, it's about 5 or 6 different big banks. Deutsche Bank is Wall Street for Europe. I don't think Societe Generale, Crédit Agricole, BNP Paribas in France, the big 3 in France, I don't think they hold a candle to Deutsche Bank in the derivative holdings. But then you got the British. The British are also involved with Wall Street, hand in hand, defending the derivatives. But Deutsche Bank is a bit on its own in the woods. They're not going to be abandoned. They're just going to have a great difficulty in managing things. Back to Facebook. Before I get to Facebook, I'd like to mention that some Trump supporters have taken out a big advertisement, I believe in the New York Times, showing that Amazon's CEO Bezos is in line for a renewal of a non-bid CIA contract for cloud storage. And it might be a good idea for Trump to wake up and interfere with that automatic renewal of a no-bid sweet contract with Langley. I think they're called the FANGs. Like, what is it? Netflix, Google, Facebook,
Amazon.
Yeah. I think they're all going to be in trouble. I'm hoping the first two to die will be Facebook and Amazon. What Amazon CEO did, buying up the Washington Post and joining in the pro-Hillary propaganda and falsified news, I think was worthy of sedition charges. I'd like to see the Washington Post shut down for 90 days. I'd like to see CNN shut down for 90 days. I'd like to see the New York Times shut down for 90 days. Let them struggle to recover, like SMU did with football, Southern Methodist. Very difficult to recover from that. Force a change in the ownership. As for Facebook, I'd like to see them charged with terrorism sedition for censoring out the early warnings on known terrorist events in the recent past. I'd like to see Zuckerberg have his identity revealed as a grandson to King Rockefeller. His real name is Greenberg, so he changed it to Zuckerberg. Okay, here's a funny little trivia question for you, Craig. I remember when AT&T went out and other companies went in, and I don't know what, maybe Chubb Insurance came in, or for the S&P 500 and for the Dow, there were qualifications. In particular, the S&P said you need to have a decade of experience in business and a tangible product, even if it's financial tangible products, you know, like savings accounts, CDs, whatever, a loan book, a credit book, portfolio, etc. for a bank. You have to have a tangible business and 10 years experience. Then suddenly Facebook is in S&P. They had neither.
Right.
Okay, that convinced me that they were fraudulent and part of the elite. That was a long time before, I noticed, a long time before they got some bad publicity of censoring out the Brussels, Paris, and Nice terrorist events that were staged by the security organizations for respective governments. So I'd love to see Facebook go down. I get 2 morons a week sending me a Facebook or a LinkedIn invitation. I got a notice right on the main public domain site saying, do not ever send me an invitation to the social networks. I don't wish to be tracked like a piece of cattle. Okay, I have done some experiments over the years with both Facebook and LinkedIn. It's sometimes from a client. Not always, but usually from a client, most of the time. So I send the client an email and say, did you send this to me or was it computer generated? 80% of the time, it's computer generated. So they're doing extensive marketing, programs and initiatives to expand their client base in Facebook and LinkedIn without the approval or knowledge of their own clients. I just sent one out about 3 weeks ago, and that turned out to be an actual invitation from a client. And he said, well, Jim, it would be great to have you in my group, hear about what you're doing and what you're up to and what your opinion is on something. Instead of an email, I could share it. It's handy. I said, it's handy for you. It's a nuisance for me. I don't have anything to do with it. Thanks.
Well, we'll see what happens to him next.
With Amazon. Amazon is a problem. They've got a cloud storage contract with Langley. They use it to undercut predatory pricing against other cloud storage competitors.
Just as they undercut predatory pricing in everything they do.
Well, they're allowed to undercut in pricing if they're effective and efficient in their floor operations. What I object to is they get a sweet deal with Langley on cloud storage and they use it to do predatory pricing against their competitors. They are efficient. They are effective. I give them credit for that. I just don't think they should expand into the newspaper business in Washington, D.C. They should have forced divestiture of that and bring in maybe a Trump crony involved in casinos to own the Washington Post.
We're talking about the trade war going on, as the media calls it. And he said, China started this. And I said, yeah, you're right. And he said, look at the deficit we have, $375 billion deficit. Who would do business with anybody and keep losing money? And everybody's outraged that Trump wants to stop that. And again, I make it very clear, when it comes to geopolitical things, I'm not on the same page with Trump on most of them, or many of them. But when it comes to this, I'm totally on the same page as him. The facts are there. We lost a job since Bill Clinton sold us out with NAFTA, and the rest of the Democrats and Republicans. And he sold us out with the World Trade Organization. China joined, by the way, 2 weeks after 9/11, when no one was watching. The middle class went from 5% back in 2001 to almost 35% today. And we all know that everything we pick up now, it's made in China, made in China, made in China. And who's fighting Trump on this are a lot of the people that are getting their products made up there, the retail sector. It's made in China, and they're bringing it back, marking it up, and making dough on it. So they're fighting that. So in picking up what David said, here's a story. Wall Street Journal admits China started the trade war. And this is by Wall Street Journal's Greg Ip. China started it long before Trump became president. I mean, how many more facts do you need? We lost over 3 million jobs. Those are facts, just with China. Lying, slick Willie, I didn't have sex with that woman, Monica Lewinsky. I smoked, but I didn't inhale Clinton. Promised us 200,000 manufacturing jobs with NAFTA. We lost nearly 1 million. We went from a positive trade balance to now we're down, 71 billion with NAFTA, with Mexico. It's one loss after another, 17 billion down with Canada. So it's not a trade war. One of my top trends back in 2016 was self-sustaining economies. They're throwing out this baloney that, prices will go up. Well, so what? If my wages go up, which they're not going up now for most Americans, and I'm making a lot more, I'll pay more. Just like when you have a lot of dough and you buy luxury products. So we became a dollar store society. Isn't that wonderful? Because they pay us dollar store wages. Because slimy, slick Willie, an arrogant, warmongering freak. Wonder why Hillary Clinton lost. Can't understand why. Probably because she's as disgusting as he is. Oh, they hate women. That's why. Oh, yeah, that's why 52% of the women voted for Trump. Anyway, Bill Clinton sold us out. He sold out our high-paying jobs. You don't want to get your hands dirty in the manufacturing jobs? You could get a job in the retail sector. Yeah, waiting on tables. Become a bartender. How about ambulatory care? Or I got a better one, hospitality sector. So we could pay you nothing and work in Target, Walmart, and all the other ones that have taken over the country. So, yes, I'd love to pay more if I'm making more. And a self-sustaining economy means we have, 320 million people? We're rich in just virtually every resource we need. Great country by both demographically, psychographically, and naturally. Why do I have to buy Chinese? I want to buy American. When I want some nice prosciutto, a capicola, a Parmesan, I want Italian. Like I want a nice French red wine and some nice cognac. But I want to buy my American shoes and my American pants and drive the American car if that's the best one there. I want to bring production back here because when I was a young guy, people working in what are now Rust Belt states had very nice middle-class lives. They were making more and living better. Now we're earning less and buying less. And you know the data. American consumer has over $13 trillion in debt. So, going back to the trade. As we speak, boom, zam, bada boom, the Dow is up and sharp over 600 points. And mentioned to David Knight this morning, Dow going down had nothing to do with the so-called trade war, just as those little headline news jerks in the business media said, oh, the last reason was they fired that guy, Gary Cohen. He left. Gary who? Gary what? Gary who cares? That wasn't it at all. The markets went down last Wednesday, following Jerome Powell, the new Fed chair's statement that interest rates were going up. This is from the Financial Times. Thursday, remember he comes out Wednesday. The markets were up 250 points. After they absorbed what the Fed chair said, the market closed down almost 50. That's like a 300-point change. So here's what they said. Powell lifts Fed rates. The Federal Reserve lifted short-term interest rates by a quarter point and forecast rates would rise faster than expected in the coming years. That's what drove down the markets. Don't believe me? How about this one? The Wall Street Journal. Again, Thursday after the Wednesday. Stocks fall after Fed raises rates. From the toilet paper a record, the New York Times. Market teeters and falls as Fed raises rates. That's why the markets went down. Not the baloney about Gary Cohen. Not the baloney about raising tariffs. What are they talking about? $60 billion? That's chump change. $375 billion trade deficit just with China? It's interest rates. That's what's concerning the markets. The markets went up on cheap interest rates, unprecedented in the history of the world, part one and part two. Nobody ever heard of negative and zero interest rate policy or quantitative easing. Now, we say the Trump rally, and we were the first magazine to call it. A week after he got elected, it's in our Trends Journal. We were the first one to say back in December there'd be a 10% correction in 2018, and there was. And now we're saying the Trump rally has peaked. It won't crash because of the Trump tax policies that are allowing companies to repatriate money overseas, and by lowering the taxes, they're reinvesting in stocks. That's going to keep the market up because already stock buybacks this time of the year are at record high, and so too mergers and acquisitions. So it all depends on interest rates. If interest rates go up too fast, the market goes down hard. And one to watch, and I keep saying to people, watch the price of gold. As goes gold, the opposite direction will be the markets. So thank you very much. See you soon. You know, one of the big issues going on, of course, is today the United States joined in with their European allies and others in expelling Russians because they allegedly poisoned a spy over there in the UK several days ago. Now, remember, a spy, right? Like, it's not Mary Poppins, you know, it's Cinderella they did, you know. It wasn't Mother Teresa. If they did it, it was a spy, you know. Wow, big deal, right? The Russians claim they didn't do it. And just like they have provided not one shred of evidence, not one piece of hard evidence that the Russians hacked the DNC in 2016 so that all the dirt about Hillary Clinton, or some of it, came flowing out. Not one piece of evidence. We believe, we suggest, you know, we could, you can't go to court with we believe and we suggest. How about showing me some evidence, Junior? It's like colon, and you know what goes down the colon, don't you? Powell held up that little vial of colon crap and said Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda when they didn't have any. So, going back to now this Skripal poisoning in Russia and the United States joining in with others to throw out Russian diplomats and other Russians, this is what they said. These are the quotes about their proof that the Russians did it. This is Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, whose popularity rating is in the toilet, where it belongs, and having difficulties with Brexit to get their people's minds off the problems. She's the one that started this. It's highly likely that Russia is responsible. Highly likely? Is that a fact? No, it's highly likely. And what else came out? Washington responded. It's likely responsible, the Russians. Donald Trump said, it looks like. And what else do we have here? The German Chancellor, highly likely. And Macron, the Catzon from France, there is no other plausible explanation. No? Only one explanation? No other plausible ones. How could anybody take this baloney? And that's what's going on. So it's very important to stay with the facts. And one of the facts are that, you know, one of the things I keep saying is that if you pump trillions of gallons of poison into the earth, into the water, and into the air, it's not going to be so good, particularly when you're living in an environment with so many chemical composites, whether it's in the rugs or the wood or whatever else you got around your place. So that's why it's really important for you to consider Alexa Pure Breeze Air Purifier. And that's right. And just like with many of the other products on InfoWar, when you buy it now, you get money off. And with that one, $50 off with free shipping. But it's for a limited time only at InfoWarsStores.com. And the air in your home, like the air that they keep putting out by the prostitutes in the media, it's filled with dust, bacteria, allergens, and viruses. So you got to clean that air. And your Alexa Pure Breeze Air Purifier that you could get for $50 off with free shipping for a limited time only at Infowars.com is the way to go. So, again, it's about cleansing the air and cleansing your mind from the garbage that they keep pumping into it, which was why I very much enjoy being on InfoWars with Alex Jones and David Knight with the real news. And again, all the products tie right into it. They're all connected. Keeping you healthy and keeping you clean at a time when they just keep pumping dirt down our brain. And again, staying with this comments about Russians. And by the way, the Russians have been asking for proof, and they refuse to give it to them. And again, what little clown in life would take garbage from a little jerk like Macron that got sown from France by saying there is no other plausible explanation? Oh, wait, only your explanation is the plausible one? Junior? Oh, no, not Junior. You're a little Rothschild sellout bankster boy. A boy of nothing that would be nowhere without the dough pushing you where you are, Junior. And then that other little clown, another little you-know-what, the NATO Secretary General, Secretary Jerk, Jens Stoltenberg, said this was consistent with a general, quote, reckless pattern of Russian behavior over many years. And then they got this other guy, Boris Johnson. You want to see a living clown, a live freak? Boy, I'll tell you, man, a lot of you folks out there are too young to remember the greatest show on earth, the Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus. This is a guy you would have spent a lot of dough to see, a living freak like you've never seen before. Step right up, step right up. It's Boris Johnson, a clown in real life and a clown in fake one too. This is what this little jerk said. Again, this is without a shred of evidence. He said that our quarrel is with Putin's Kremlin and with his decision, and we think it's overwhelmingly likely that it was his decision to direct the use of a nerve agent on the streets of the UK. We think you can't think of anything. You're a complete waste of a moron, and you're perfect. You are perfect because you represent the UK. Is it the FUK? Well, maybe, because that's what you're in, man. The UK. And you could put whatever letters you want in front of it. Those two just came out of my mouth because of the crap coming out of yours. How could any adult buy this? And they're all doing it without a shred of probative evidence. I think it's overwhelmingly likely. Yeah, you think. And they pull Putin into it. I mean, killing this jerk guy. And by the way, they've shown no photos of him, nothing about him, but it's just more propaganda. And that's what prostitutes do. They get paid to put out. Yep. Media whores. Paid by their corporate johns or their Washington whoremasters. Don't forget to tune in to CNN, CNBC, ABC, and all the rest for a freak show near you. And that's why you need to support InfoWars and put your money where your mind is. I like super male vitality, I like clean air, and I like a good time. And when I say we're losing it, I mean, all you had to do is look this past weekend. And all the news, after rallies, youth look to midterms. Yep, student activists pushing for tougher firearm rules, focus on November elections. You know, enough of nothing, man. Everybody that I know, adults, are looking toward high school students to lead them. I mean, not for nothing, man. I've been there. I was a high school student at one time, and I was a young guy at one time. And my dear father, may his soul rest in peace, we'd be eating dinner, and he'd say to me, I was a teenager, he'd say, you know, son, they say that youth is wasted on the young. He'd take a couple more bites and he'd say they were talking about you. In other words, you only know so much when you're a kid, so take it easy. Stopping firearms? Oh, yeah. Look at that crazy place over there. It's at war all the time. People are blowing each other's brains out with guns virtually every day. The economy's down in the crapper. Oh, Switzerland? Ah, yes. The richest country in the world. People haven't been to war since what? About the 1850s. And everybody has guns. That's right. They're not killing each other. It's not gun violence, it's violent mentality. Oh, no, those video games have nothing to do with it. No, that's why they use those same games to train guys going into the service. That's all this is electronic warfare. Shoot, boom. Hey, you remember Obama? Yes, the Nobel Peace of Crap Prize winner. Gave us the Libyan war. Assad has to go in Syria. And in the book Double Down said, quote, I'm really good at killing people. With all his drone strikes, it killed over 4,000. So, you want to have gun control? What just came out with that young man who set off those bombs in Austin? Obama describes self as, quote, psychopath. Hey, wait a minute. He didn't use a gun. He used a bomb. Oh, you're going to stop bombers, huh? Oh, yeah, we'll stop them. No, you won't. Strap it on yourself and blow up people in a subway, or wherever you want to go in a mall. You can't stop it. It's crazy minds. Knives? You're going to ban all the knives? Oh, yeah. We just use plastic knives in our kitchen. You cut somebody up with a knife real quick. Has nothing to do with it. It has to do with the mind. Hey, how about those guys that get in cars and hit mobs of people on the streets and kill masses of them? You gonna ban cars? It's the violent mentality of America. Go to the movies. You know, back in the day, when they used to have movies when I was a young guy, they were never allowed to show blood. And now, man, they got that body flying apart. So, take it easy with the youth. They're not going to lead me. We should be leading them. There was a thing called elders once upon a time. When you're a kid, you only know so much. You got to go through the trip to get there to know what it's about. So save it, Jack and Jill. Got to be even here. Not going up your hill. I know the story. And by the way, if you want to occupy something other than gun violence, how about occupying peace? Well, that's a bigger word. And again, I'm very pleased to be here. And one of the great products available at InfoWars that I love is Super Male Vitality. That's right. Keeps me loose and boogieing all the time. I take it daily, and for an old guy, man, this thing really, really helps me a lot. And when you buy it now, you have a 25% off at InfoWarsStores.com. And to help support the broadcast and get the best all-natural products, again, they're dropping the price 25% at InfoWarsStores.com. And, you know, they say Super Male Vitality has received thousands of 5-star reviews from listeners who have been blown away by the effects. And I've been blown away by the effects, and so too have a number of my friends. You know, the older you get, the more vitality you need to keep going. And this thing keeps me alive and hopping and going in a very good direction. So I really would suggest you consider getting Super Male Vitality for 25% off at InfoWarsStores.com and see the product your fellow InfoWars like Gerald Celente swear by. Make sure you get it before they run out, because when you get this, man, you're going to be running. I run all over, by the way. Every time I run from block to block, I got to go from here to there, I run. And Super Male Vitality keeps that boogie going, you know? So going back to this, all these protests and all the media attention that they're getting, again, how about looking at the bigger issue? And to me, the bigger issue is that violence has become the norm and is very well accepted. And again, Hollywood sells it, and the military-industrial complex makes money off it. You look at that new budget that was passed. Half the dough is going to the military-industrial complex. Oh, you want to stop gun violence? When anybody says to me, what do you think about banning guns? I say, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. Let's start with the military. Let's cut that budget way back, man. Bring home the troops, secure the homeland. I'm a believer in George Washington and Eisenhower and George Washington's farewell address, no foreign entanglements. Can't keep winning and losing these wars. Don't keep spending money on them. So, violence. How about the militarized police of the United States? Yeah, get rid of a lot of their stuff, and then tell me to get rid of my guns. All right? So, save it, man. Don't want to hear it. Because, again, you could strap on a bomb. Hey, look at the TSA. Look at the feel-up freaks at the TSA. Oh, you missed that study? They feel you up and check you down, and they can't find you.
Inequality in the United States has not been this pronounced in over a century. The top 10% has 50% of the country's income, and the top 1% has 20% of the income. While a quarter of all American workers struggle on wages of less than $10 an hour, putting them below the poverty line, the salaries of the CEOs of top corporations are often in the billions of dollars. This income inequality is global. The richest 1% of the world's population controls 40% of the world's wealth. What does inequality this pronounced mean? And what are its consequences? How did it happen? And how much worse will it get with a new tax code that raises health care premiums, slashes social and public welfare programs such as Medicaid, Pell Grants, and food stamps, and ensures that tax hikes over the long term will climb for the working class? I discuss inequality with economist Rick Wolff. So where were this late stage of capitalism, which the Trump administration is accelerating? It's part of a pattern. Tell us where we are.
Well, we're at a point that your numbers verify, in which the capitalist system, which has been the growing dominant system for the last 300 years, wanted to present itself in contradiction to feudalism and slavery as the system that creates a massive middle class that lifts everybody up. And what we have, now that it has become the global system, is the exact opposite. It has reproduced the kinds of grotesque inequalities that we associate with everything from the Versailles Palace of the late Louis back to the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. It is a stunning expose of an economic system that couldn't deliver what it promised and now wants to distract everybody from this harsh reality that you pointed to. This is the major measure of a capitalist system by its own claims, and it can't deliver. That's why we're besieged with economic and political theater. anti-immigration, tariffs, all that kind of stuff, blaming foreigners, anything to get us away from confronting an economic system that doesn't work for the majority of the people.
Well, not only does it not work, but the assault is being exacerbated, as we saw with the new tax code.
Well, the new tax code really is a kind of explosive excess. It's when you've crossed the line and finally it is so grotesque that even those who didn't want to see are forced to see. We see in that tax cut, if I can take a moment, we've had 30, 40 years in which corporations have paid less taxes than they ever did, have made more money than they ever did before, have been able to keep wages stagnant while the productivity of labor rose. This is the last moment historically that they needed another big gift, let alone at the expense of the very people whose wages have been stagnant. To give them a tax bust of this sort, basically reducing from 35% to 20% is a 40% cut. This kind of crazy excess does remind you of the late Louis in France before the French Revolution, when the level of excess reached the explosive social dimensions, and I think that's where we are.
What about that moment in American history, which, you know, that let's call it the golden age of labor right after World War II, when capitalism took credit for, and we did have for a period of a couple decades, a well-compensated working class, middle class. Workers could be part of the middle class.
Well, you know, the irony, which people don't want to remember, is yes, that's true, but the irony is, why did it happen? And it happened because the last time capitalism crashed in 1929, and that was the only one worse than what we are living through now since 2008, at that moment in history, we had a different American response. The mass of working people joined unions. Right. These are people whose parents hadn't been in a union. They had never been in a union. They saw the union as a way to get through this depression with less damage than you otherwise would have had to undergo. And they joined socialist and communist parties. And those parties worked together with the labor union, the CIO, and you had a mass, and I don't use this word lightly, a mass uprising of victims of capitalism shaking their finger at the system and basically giving Mr. Roosevelt and the political elite an ultimatum.
Well, he heard it. In his private correspondence,
either you help us through this depression or there will be a revolution. The CIO tended to want the help. The socialists and communists tilted the other way. And it was a good cop, bad cop kind of routine that was done, and he got the message. And that's why he created Social Security, unemployment compensation, the first minimum wage, and public employment.
And 12 million people put to work on the government payroll.
And when you do all that, you create, for the first time, a real pushback against capitalism's basic tendency towards inequality. And so we had a few decades of the results of that.
Well, the irony is that Roosevelt said that one of his greatest achievements is that he saved capitalism.
Absolutely.
He understood that he ameliorated or adjusted a collapsing system, and he did save it. And yet, ever since, let's say, 1948 with Taft-Hartley, this draconian bill that makes it hard to organize forward, the capitalist class essentially sowed the seeds of their own destruction, didn't they?
That's the irony. He saved them from themselves, but they were so enraged by the fact that the way he paid for Social Security unemployment was by taxing corporations and the rich.
Which were up to 90%, right?
Amazing. 90% for the top bracket for the income tax, much higher rates on corporations. This notion that a politician would tax corporations and the rich to provide for the mass of people, which, by the way, nowadays is said to be a political impossibility. I like to remind people, the one politician who was forced to do it was reelected 3 times. It's not a route to political oblivion.
He was one of those popular political figures in the country.
Clearly, in the history of the United States, no president had ever achieved that before. You would have thought Mr. Obama might have thought about that model in terms of his future, but that's another story. In any case, after the war, the reaction of the business community, enraged that they had to pay these taxes, were to destroy that coalition. communists, socialists, and unions. First go after the communists, convert them from militants into agents of a foreign power, then go around the country telling everybody that socialism is just like communism, it's just spelled differently, and when you got rid of them, you go after the labor movement, which has been, as we know, on a 50-year decline. So, yes, the capitalists got rid, but the irony, as you put it, they got rid of the coalition that forced it, but that got rid of the very mechanism that Roosevelt told them saved you. And so we now have a crisis since 2008 without the movement possibilities because it is so systematically crushed. And so you have a capitalism spinning out of control, and Mr. Trump is like the cartoon alternative to Mr. Roosevelt. He doesn't get anything. He's on a rush to make it even more grandiose and excessive, and I really do wonder how long this can last.
Well, that's the question, because lifting the very tepid reforms off the speculators on Wall Street, the global banks, what's going to happen? I mean, I think first, one of the things I'd like you to address just before that is how the figures that they use to justify what they call a recovery are in fact fictional.
Yeah, there's a number of ways in which this is done. You know, let me take a step back. In economics, if you're not an ideologue, you understand that at any moment there are an immense array of economic statistics. Some of them make it look like the future might be a little bit better. Others make it look like the future looking grim. A reasonable approach tries to weigh these. But if you don't do analysis, you do advertising or ideological more, then you only look at the one and you pretend the other ones don't exist. So bear with me if I point out some of the data that don't show it. That is, don't show a recovery. Number one, the unemployment number that they love to talk about. The way unemployment numbers are gathered in America, which so few people understand, is you ask a lot of people two questions. Are you working? If they say yes, they're employed. If they say no, you ask them a second question. Are you looking for work or are you not? If you say I am looking for work, you're counted as unemployed. If you say I'm not looking, you are counted as out of the labor force. You are not counted as unemployed. So you don't need to be a statistical genius to understand that if over the last 10 years, a significant number of people gave up looking because it's too disgusting, because the jobs they were offered were so inferior to what they had before, that the jobs they offered were so insecure as to make their family life impossible, so they either went back to school or went into the illegal economy or began to live off their friends, relatives, and neighbors, then you think unemployment rate went down as if this were an improvement. But the actuality is it's a deterioration, and we know that because what it does is it leaves a smaller number of people in the labor force to support the entire population, and that's fundamentally a bad thing.
But it also does things